Distributing data with SQL Server integration services. In this nugget, we'll start by talking a little bit about what SQL Server integration services is. We'll talk about managing packages such as package security, scheduling package execution, and deploying packages across SQL Server instances. So let's start with a brief overlook of what integration services is all about. There's a few different reasons you would want to use integration services, but basically they all come down to the idea of moving data from one place to another place. And those places might involve SQL Server. They might involve completely different types of database servers, such as Oracle or MySQL. Or they might even involve file-based data, such as CSV files or XML files, or even something from a Microsoft Access database. In the simplest type of integration services scenario, you start off with source data, and you move that data exactly as it is to a target or a destination. In fact, when you use the copy database wizard within SQL Management Studio, what you're really doing is creating an integration services package that pretty much does this, copies data from the source to the target. And again, that entire set of steps, all two of them, gets rolled up into something called a package. Packages can be stored in files, which makes them kind of easy to move around between different servers if you need to, or they can be stored in SQL Server itself in a database. And that kind of makes them more accessible within that particular SQL Server and prevents the need to manage all the different files running around the file system. Now, you can get a lot more complicated than just a simple copy. For example, there's something called extract, transform, and load, or ETL. And this is about extracting data from one source, transforming it to look like something else, maybe renaming columns, maybe doing lookups, and then loading the transformed data into a destination. And this is where integration service is really, really strong. You start off with your source data, and you've got your target at the other end, and maybe you're going to query a certain amount of data from the source. You're not going to grab all of it, you're just going to grab data that meets certain criteria. And then you might do some transforms, things like changing column names or doing lookups. For example, a column that contains USA might be translated to United States. So you can do data transforms like that. And and these transforms themselves might include lookups from other databases elsewhere. Might involve pulling data in from other databases. You might be merging data from 3 or 4 different databases into one. But at the end, you sort of get each row of data like you want it to look, and you put it in the target. And within integration services, you've got this thing called a package designer. And it really allows you to create a workflow visually, much like you're seeing here. You drag your source and you drag different types of tasks and transform tasks and lookup tasks and all sorts of other stuff. You can do a lot of things just graphically that way. And then you can go to an even deeper level and actually write code, almost like script code, that handles more complex data lookup or transformation tasks. And then all the data is pumped through to the target. Now let's be really clear that actually designing and programming packages is not within the scope of this particular series of nuggets. However, managing the packages, and again, once all of this workflow is finished, it all gets bundled up into something called a package. So managing those packages and the security on those packages and troubleshooting them and scheduling them work and everything else, that's really your job as a DBA. Now, one of the first things we can talk about is troubleshooting. You as a DBA have really not got a lot of visibility into what's going on inside the package. It's the responsibility of the package's author or designer or programmer or whatever other term you want to use to build in troubleshooting. For example, in a query step, they might decide to log some information about what's going on. In a transform step, they might write some log information or some troubleshooting information. And within the package designer, you actually have logging providers that can help the designer create a troubleshooting log and so forth. But ultimately, troubleshooting the package is up to the person who designed it. And designing packages isn't what we're all about. we're really going to focus on managing packages within integration services. So to get started, we will open SQL Management Studio, and we'll connect as usual. And you may find yourself sort of bopping around in here wondering where integration services fits in. You might find yourself down here in Management under Legacy at Data Transformation Services. Under older versions of SQL Server, Data Transformation Services is what performed these types of data transformation tasks. We called it DTS back then. And SQL Server 2005 actually took DTS and made it much bigger and more powerful and a little bit more complex and renamed it to SQL Server Integration Services. So this legacy stuff is just old DTS packages. It's not integration services. We actually have to connect to a separate service in order to manage integration services. Each instance of SQL Server can have its own instance of integration services, so we're going to connect to this server's instance of integration services. And we've really got two areas here: stored packages, either from the file system or from the MSDB database, which is, if you store the package in SQL Server, this is where it's kept, is the MSDB database. And then we've got running packages. There's actually a lot of packages running. Let's look at why. First of all, we don't have anything in the file system, so we're not going to worry about that. And under MSDB, we've got some different categories of things. We've got data collectors. And if you remember from the previous nugget when we set up data collectors, these guys are actually set up as integration services packages. And let me make a little more room here. These packages that are running in most cases are data collectors. There's the T-SQL query collector, the query activity collector, performance counter collectors. So these running packages are the ones that are taking care of that data collection job. We've also got maintenance plans. If you remember, we created in an earlier nugget a database maintenance plan called My Plan, and it actually is an integration services package. So it sits out here, and there it is right there. It's not running right now. Then we've also got old DTS packages and any copy database wizard packages. So again, in a previous nugget, we had copied a database, and we saved that package into integration services, and there it is right there. And once you've got one of these packages in here, there's not a lot that you as the administrator have to do to manage it. One of the things you need to do is worry about its security. So, and the way to do that is to look at package roles, and you can specify the roles that are allowed to read the package or execute it, and specify the role that's allowed to write the package or modify it. By default, the DB DTS admin role has ownership of the package and is allowed to write it. And by default, DB DTS admin, DB DTS operator are both allowed to run the package or read the package. And you can change these to whatever you want. Leaving them at the default is appropriate if that's how your organization has configured their security. So those are sort of the steps to getting your packages kind of viewing, see what's going on, managing them, getting the security configured on them, and so forth. The next thing you're going to want to do is learn how to schedule these things to run on a regular basis, because that's really where integration services comes into play. Let's say you've got a legacy system, or maybe not even a legacy system. You've got some data living on another type of server. Maybe it's in a human resources database, for example. And on a regular basis, you want to go query information out of that human resources database, put it into another location, maybe a CSV file that another administrator will use to create Active Directory accounts for new users in the environment. Maybe at the same time, you want to take that data and put it into another database, maybe an in-house application that manages sales orders. So one developer needs to sit down and create the integration services package that will go get the data, transform it to whatever it needs to look like, and put it in all the different places it needs to go. Now they might say, we want this package to run every night, or we want it to run once a night, or we want it to run once a week, or once a month, or whatever it is. Your job as the administrator is to actually schedule it, and you don't do that through integration services. We're going to do that through SQL Server Agent. If we create a new job in SQL Server Agent, let's just go right to steps and add a new step. You can see that one type of step is to execute a SQL Server Integration Services package. When you click that, you get to decide where the package is coming from, either from the file system, or you can say it's coming from a SQL Server, and then you would provide your credentials to connect to SQL Server, click Next, choose which package it is you want to schedule. Then you can go to the job itself, set up the schedules, determine when it happens, send alerts if something goes wrong, and all the usual stuff that you can do with a SQL Server agent job. So SQL Server agent knows how to go in, get the package, open it up, tell integration services to execute it, and then keep track of whatever results come out of that. Now the last thing you'll need to do is to deploy packages. And you've got a couple of different options here. Remember that SQL is capable of storing integration services packages either in the MSDB database of a SQL Server or in a simple file. So how you deploy your packages kind of depends on how you plan to execute them. For example, it's possible to have one SQL Server agent living on, let's say, server 1, look at the MSDB database on, say, server 2, query packages from it, and execute them. The packages would actually execute over here on server 1. It's just the package data, its configuration, that's going to be pulled from server 2. So you could choose to deploy all of your SQL integration services packages to a single storage location and then just have them execute from wherever they need to go. That's kind of nice because it makes it convenient for your developers, the people who are creating those packages. They've only got one place that they need to go to actually find the packages, make changes, modifications, and so forth. Now another option you've got is to just store the things in files. And here's how you would actually do that within the product. So down here under Integration Services, we're going to go to some stored packages, find a package we like, such as this maintenance plan, and then simply export the package. You can decide if you're going to export it to SQL Server or to a file. So if it's a SQL Server, you then specify the server, what you want the new package name to be, what your authentication is going to look like, and so forth. If you exported it to a file, that gives you the ability to save it up into a zip file, email it halfway across the world. Whoever gets it can import a package from a file, and they just specify the path, import it, give it a name, and keep the protection level of the original package. Now this is another area where security comes into play. When you're creating a new package and importing it into the system, you have several options. Not to save sensitive data, and that might include passwords on database connections. Encrypt the sensitive data with a user key, in which case you'll be prompted for that. Encrypt the sensitive data with a password, and here's where you would type the password. Encrypt all the data with the user's key, encrypt all the data with a password, or rely on the server storage and roles for access control, which basically means there's no encryption, and who can get to the package is really determined by the permissions either on the file or the database that the package is being stored in. So there are a couple of different deployment options you have. Here's some different ways that you might want to use that, for example. Let's clear this out. Let's say we've got, server 1. And this is the one where all of our developers are going to be working on packages and storing them and testing them. When they're finished testing something and they know it's working, we might have server 2, which is our production integration services storage. So we'll export the package from server 1 and import it on server 2. You can do that in a single step, simply by exporting it from server 1 into a database on server 2. Then we might run the packages from server 1, or we might have different servers in different locations of our company, server 3, server 4, and maybe these are in close physical proximity to some of the data sources. So they're going to retrieve packages from server 2 using SQL Server Agent and execute the packages there. So that means the packages can execute wherever in your enterprise they need to execute. Usually you want them to be have really good LAN quality connectivity to whatever data they need to get to, so that they're not pulling a lot of data across a wide area network. But you can still store all of the packages centrally and have even a separate set of storage for packages that are under development. And that's just one way. Depending on your exact business needs, you can set this up in a number of different ways. You could decide that we're going to store packages out here and out here where they're being executed. We'll still develop them here, but we'll export them to their destination when we know they're ready to go. Lots of different options, whatever seems to work for your environment. And that's really as complicated as deployment needs to be. Exporting to a file lets you move it off of your network very, very easily, or you can export it to a database and then import either from a database or from a file. And then you can use roles to determine who has access to it. You can also run packages manually. Let's go ahead and run this one now so we can see what that looks like. This is going to allow us to get into the package, set a few configuration options. Now, because this particular package was created by the maintenance plan wizard, there's not really a lot that we need to specify. It's going to indicate that these are the connections being used. It's just a local server connection. Execution options. Do I want to just validate it, make sure it works, but not actually execute it? You can sort of think of that as a compile step. It makes SQL Server run through the package in its head to see if everything looks right. Do I want to fail the package if it doesn't validate? Some reporting. What sort of things do I want to come out of there? Well, you can choose warning, custom events. You can log different pieces of information. You can specify a log provider. Again, this has to be built into the package, this logging information usually. You can set values if the package is configurable and needs certain input values to tell it what to do. All sorts of interesting stuff you can do on there. 9 times out of 10, you're just going to need to execute the package as is. Whoever developed the package will have set all of those different configuration options. If not, if they've developed a package that's intended to be more generic and is intended to have some of those configuration items added in during execution, well, then that's where you would do it. And if you're setting up the job to execute, or setting up the package to execute as a SQL Server agent job, you have the same ability to specify configuration parameters if the package requires them. In this nugget, we've talked about SQL Server integration services. We talked about what they are and how packages are built and then managed within SQL Server. We looked at package security options. We talked about scheduling packages through SQL Server Agent, and we looked at deploying packages, either between SQL Server instances, across your organization, or whatever else you might need to do. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.